Welcome back to Dueling Banjos. Today we're going to be talking about Queen of Earth, written and directed by Alex Ross Perry, starring Elizabeth Moss, Catherine Waterston, and a smattering of others. And I'll start, I think that one of the key components of the film is, obviously it's about Catherine's emotional and psychological decline, but what fuels that is sort of an emotional dependency. And that's what sparks her depression, is when the people she's emotionally dependent on leave her life. So in the case of her father dying, in the case of her boyfriend leaving, and then sort of throughout the film, Ginny or Virginia's seeming disconnect or distance emotionally from her also fuels that. But I think that, one of the things you hear about depression is that it's the people feel isolated and they don't want to be an emotional burden on other people. And, sort of the unspoken fact about it is oftentimes it is an emotional burden on other people. Right? It manifests itself in an emotional dependency on other people to listen to you, to try to understand or let you vent or things like that. And so it does, for lack of a better term, become an emotional burden. And I think that is what Catherine is hoping Virginia, the role Virginia can play. Catherine is hoping she can play the role of that emotional strength that'll listen to her, and when Virginia doesn't want to do that and refuses to do that, it perpetuates and accelerates her psychological decline.
I take issue a bit with the idea that Virginia is crucial in Catherine's mental decline. The movie is sort of a juxtaposition between two approaches to relationships, and if you want to say in the modern world, you can, but basically it's two different ways of approaching relationships. And the Virginia is set against Catherine on the basis of, how do they cope with the problems of relationships with men. And for Catherine, she's basically lived a sheltered life. That's the implication. She looked up to her father. She followed her father in the arts. It's implied somewhat that she wants to be her father, and she has this idea that her father, who committed suicide, was, like a great artist, a genius, she says. And the flashback scenes show her in a relationship with James, her ex-boyfriend, that Virginia critiques and criticizes as being too dependent. So we see in Catherine a desire to essentially emotionally submit to a man. I don't think the implication is ever that she was submitting in that way to Virginia. And if you're trying to say the course of the movie shows that she would like to, I think she has a pretty good idea that Virginia is not the person who's going to be able to help her. So if Catherine is looking for Virginia to help her out of her mental predicament, that's also accompanied with an understanding that Virginia is not going to be that person. And so in the case of Virginia, the approach is different, which is she lives in this kind of shell where she's accepted the casual nature of relationships with men. And she has a lot of envy for Catherine because Catherine seemed to have submitted emotionally or depended on men emotionally, and seemed for a while to have a good life because of that. And so her kind of satisfaction in Catherine's mental decline is based on the vindication for her view, which is that you do not open yourself up to that degree. And Virginia doesn't seem like she's having a great time because she's done that, but at least she hasn't declined to the extent that Catherine has.
Well, I think you're putting way too much weight on the relationships with men as opposed to the relationships with each other. So, I mean, they lead different lifestyles, have different mindsets as far as it pertains to relationships, but the focus of the movie is on those two and the actions that they commit, that the other one responds to. And so, it's shown that the year prior to the events of the film, or what is the present in the film, the year prior, it was Virginia that sort of sought out a week away with her friend to spend some time with her friend and just relax together. And it was Catherine who brought her boyfriend and was spending a bunch of time with him and giggling with him and couldn't get away from him, which is what Virginia took issue with. And the script gets flipped in the present now that Catherine is single and just coming off a recent breakup, and Virginia now is seeing sort of this guy Rich casually and always bringing him over. But I think those are just circumstantial things, and the examination that the movie is actually taking is with the role that friends play in each other's emotional well-being, and what responsibility you can put on a friend to take care of your emotional state. And, that's a complicated thing. And it's outright said, through sort of a passive aggressive comment of Catherine's that the only two people that cared about me have left, referring to her father and her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend. Which is
both happen to be men.
Which is a slight, but it's said as a slight against Virginia of, I'm not including you in one of the people that's caring about me.
Right. So you can say that there's the question of, men and women. You can say that the movie is saying or is examining the fact that female relationships are always impeded by relationships with men. But to say that the movie isn't dealing primarily with how women approach men and the psychological consequences of their relationships with men is crazy. It's what the movie's about.
It's not.
Yeah, it is.
No, it isn't, because there's a whole lengthy monologue about the nature of her depression and
what's causing her depression.
But that's not what the movie isn't about how she develops depression. It's about how her depression is being received by her friend on this week getaway.
Yeah, it's examining the mental fallout from a life that had been lived in a state of dependency on men. So
now it isn't.
Yes, it is. That's what the whole movie's about.
Virginia doesn't, because it's shown explicitly in the past that Virginia, who you're claiming has sort of this casual sort of view of men, really doesn't put a lot of emotional dependency on them, was irritated the year prior when they went out on this week-long vacation, and she was the one who was like, I want to spend time with you, Catherine.
Right, because you pay a deep price as a woman to make yourself unconquerable. There's an envy involved in, I have looked at the state of men and I don't like what I see, because a lot of them are opportunists. A lot of them will abandon you when they can. A lot of them lie to you and say that they'll be committed when they won't. And so Virginia has made the choice for herself to embrace the casual nature of relationships in our world. And that's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for a man to do either, but it's especially not an easy thing for a woman to do. So the envy of Catherine is that you seem to be able to have a emotionally loving and dependent situation. You open yourself up to the vulnerable nature of that, and you seem to be doing okay with that. That's the source of Virginia's envy. That's why she's constantly trying to put distance between Catherine and James in the flashback sequences. Because there's an envy of that, even if you yourself have made the choice to say, I am going to avoid the disastrous fallout from opening up.
No, but then you're not envious, because you would be pursuing what you're presumably envious of.
No, because it's like this.
Of course, it's like if I'm jealous of something you have, I want to go out and get that thing.
No, the extremities of experience go together. So every man and woman of our age has a choice to say, I am going to pursue relationships genuinely, and what that means is I get to enjoy the authentic love that might come from a relationship where the other person is cooperative, but I'm also risking the immense pain emotionally of having such a thing collapse. And Virginia says, no, I'm going to keep it, I'm going to keep my experience sort of in the middle of, I'm not going to invest emotionally strongly into anyone, any man, or perhaps any woman, any friend. And that saves me from the fallout that happens to Catherine. So you have two choices.
No, but again, you're putting too much emphasis on the man's role in these things. I mean, why is there that whole scene then with the dinner party? She basically wants to have a week with her friend because she wants her friend to be this emotional bedrock that she can vent to, she can rely on to be there for her. And when she brings all these other people around, I mean, yes, obviously Rich is the one that most consistently comes around, but she's approached at that party by a woman who gets in her face and is trying to talk to her, and she still has a negative reaction.
And she has a negative reaction. Answer this question, because the crux of the problem is, do you think, in other words, do you think that Catherine would have declined if Virginia was totally accommodating to her? The movie takes place over over 5 days of Catherine slowly descending into insanity. And you keep emphasizing the actions of Virginia and contributing to that, which they no doubt did. I would say the roots of the insanity were already in place by the fact that her father committed suicide and her boyfriend cheated and dumped her.
Because insanity is a progression brought on by consistent experiences that are emotionally heavy, that just break you ultimately. And so you can be in a vulnerable place, but you can also get out of that vulnerable place, presumably if the experiences you're seeking are therapeutic to what you're going through, which is what she wanted this experience with her friend to be. And this is why I think it's an interesting question of intent for Virginia. Virginia is not a stupid person. She can see that her actions are being received extremely negatively by her friend. The actions of bringing Rich over, which she doesn't need to do. She's doing it, because she finds fun to have him around or something like that, or hook up with him or whatever. But she's seeing that her friend is responding extremely negatively to that. So there has to be some intention in saying, I realize that this is distressing you, but I'm going to continuously do it. And that intention is either rooted in malice or just pure self-interest of, I'm going to have fun on this week in the way that I felt I should. Me having fun is not you dumping and venting your emotional problems on me. It is me going out and spending time hooking up with this guy, and me going out and having fun in a canoe on the lake. It's like these things. And so it's the question for me, and why I think the two women are the central characters and not the men, is because of
okay, but that's not what I said. They're obviously the central characters.
But you keep putting weight on peripheral characters because as if they're the source of
because the friction between the two women is the movie shows the friction is entirely due to the different approaches to life shown through their relationship choices. That is the source of the friction. So you can't dismiss.
I don't think that it is.
Yes, it is. There's a suggestion of Catherine had sort of a high class upbringing from a famous man, but it's also suggested that Virginia's parents are
in fact
rich. So these are two women.
Because I think the circumstances you're describing are actually a justification of my conclusion, where because they're different in lifestyle, they don't know how to relate to one another's depression, to one another's sadness. And so in both instances, the year prior, Catherine is totally oblivious to the fact that her actions are contributing to the irritation of Virginia. And now in the present, I mean, Virginia is portrayed as a little more self-aware, which is why I think there's a deliberate aspect to some of the things that she's doing. But the difference in lifestyle causes them not to know how to be the solution or be the therapy to one another's issues.
But you're abstracting differences in lifestyle to mean something broader than what the movie shows, which is it's basically their relationships with men. Why is Virginia envious and passive aggressive and malicious to Catherine?
Because of what happened the year before.
Right. And what happened the year before? What did it involve?
She was spending tickets someone else that would involve
Catherine parading a good relationship in her face when she was going through a period of, dissatisfaction and romance. That's what it was. It was she brought a man in and she was flaunting her great relationship that she had, and Virginia was envious of that. So all of the problems relate to how the women are dealing with.
But then Catherine wouldn't be envious of Virginia's relationship because if she's glorified a committed relationship,
would be because you have what you're giving up a great deal.
But there's no emotion.
Preserve yourself from.
There's no emotion in Virginia's relationship, or presumably deeper level of love or romance.
I think it's fair to say she doesn't have deep emotional connections with anyone as far as we see.
Okay, so Catherine, why would Catherine be envious of that situation if she's seeing...
Catherine's not envious.
Why would she be irritated by that situation?
Because, in some sense, Catherine is obviously a dependent kind of person because she was raised by her father, who she depended on, and he killed himself. And she was in a quality relationship, she thought, with James, who abandoned her. Now, she thinks you're right on the point of she thinks she can try to get that dependence from Virginia, but the reason why she can't is entirely due to the fact that the friction between them is caused by Virginia's resentment of how Catherine goes about relationships with men. And the movie is a microcosm, so I don't think you can make this point, in general terms, but obviously female friendships are difficult when men exist because it's a constant viewing of not the women are not viewing themselves as competition per se, but they're assessing their own choices and successes through romance, and that creates a kind of inevitable rivalry that prevents them from being able to be true dependents emotionally on each other. And so
but there is no competition if you don't desire the thing that the other person has. So if Catherine truly desires a committed relationship,
you're just hitting at the ambivalence of all romance matters, which is every decision is the wrong decision because you end up being preoccupied with the decisions you didn't make. So it's very hard for Virginia not to be somewhat envious because she said, I will be closed off because I don't want to get damaged and hurt. And that's a difficult decision for her to make. And for Catherine, she made that decision and she's in a very bad state throughout the movie because of the bad consequences that she opened herself up to by making the decision to be an emotionally dependent kind of person. And so the envy is there for Virginia because it's difficult to give up the positive experiences of a loving relationship. But it's also, I saved myself from the worst fallout that could happen.
Okay, so you're claiming it's a defense mechanism, but you don't get, if you've made a choice, unless you desire, I mean, you're suggesting that Virginia desires a committed relationship, but is making the choice not to find one? That to me would have her descending into insanity, because she's never going to achieve the thing that she wants. She's perceived or presented as being extremely stable, self-aware, and intelligent. Not insane at all.
Not insane, but clearly massively dissatisfied.
You see in real life, a lot of women who choose to just engage in like hookup culture to have this casual sense of romance do end up extremely emotionally broken later on in life, right?
Because what they would prefer,
even the phase that they're going through.
Yeah, because what they would always prefer, if they had their choice, is the best man they could find, totally in love with them. That's obviously the choice of every woman.
But she is not perceived as struggling or being emotionally broken by this situation.
Because she has made the difficult,
and she's not perceived as being desperate either.
She has put up the difficult defenses that a lot of women put up, confronting the perfidy of men, which is that.
But you see the conflict in a lot of those women in real life. You see how it's affecting them emotionally.
Well, and
they are not.
We don't know
stable off
when Virginia gets older. We don't know how she'll turn out. But the point is she's made the choice.
How old do you think she is here?
In her 30s.
Okay, you don't think by now a choice to just engage in casual romance into your 30s would manifest itself in some emotional conflict?
There's plenty of people that can handle that. It's they have a sense of what they've lost. They have a sense of I didn't get exactly what I wanted, and they regret that, but they accept the reality of the world, the reality of men, and the reality of women, which is that everybody is going for the best they possibly can get, and you have to sort of make the choice if you're going to open yourself up to be emotionally devastated, or you're going to become closed off. And both of those have different. So you can't say, I mean, I don't know what you would say, but who's in the better state at the end of the movie? It's clearly Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would seem to vindicate her choice to say, in this world that we have, I'm backing off from deep attachment. I'm backing off from deep emotional connection, because otherwise I'll end up insane like the woman who did.
Yeah, but again, I think we're arguing two separate things about the insanity. I don't think the insanity comes as a result of. I think it's the starting point is the breaking up of of Catherine's relationship. I don't think that's why she goes completely insane by the end. I think that's just a starting point. She's looking for therapy for that starting point and not finding it, which is sending her deeper and deeper into insanity. Yeah, but if it were doing what you're saying it's doing, it'd show both women going insane based off their choices.
No,
because have you ever heard the adage, it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all? Because if you actually
have opinion you can have.
No, but if that's actually a thing that you have felt, the reward of love, presumably you could believe that you'd find it again. Now, it may hurt emotionally in the moment, but the idea that you can discover it again is what causes you to go on and try to find it again. You know that it exists, presumably.
That's not how humans normally react to these situations. It's not like, I got blasted by this previous relationship because I invested. Most humans don't respond with that by saying, well, I know love exists. I'll just gotta find a different person.
I mean, there's a fall off. There's different stages.
You start building up your wall because you realize that the difficulty of getting to the positive aspects of a relationship are not worth the terrible consequences emotionally of having that relationship collapse. So you're like, Catherine should just say, well, man, I remember the good times with James, and we were really into each other and it was awesome. Let me just find another guy. I mean, that's not how humans work.
Well, if you actually believe in the virtues of love, it is. What you would say is, this was not meant to be. If I felt it once before, I can feel it again. Now, there's going to be a period of time where there is a tremendous amount of grief and sadness as a result of what you thought would be that lasting thing coming to an end. Of course there is. But it's about what you believe exists and the rewards of what you believe exists. And so Virginia has never felt the rewards of being in love.
No, and she's also never felt the deep pains of having been abandoned in love.
Right.
So that's a choice everyone's got to make.
Well, it is. And I'd say that if you are making the assertion that Catherine actually has felt the rewards of love, then she would go through a grieving period and come back and say, well, I can find it again. What I think, that's why I think the movie is far more focused on the dynamic of the depression, because she's going through a grieving stage. And what she's hoping for is that she can get through this grieving stage with her friend as an emotional support and come out okay, getting over it. It's going to be tough, but through this week spent with her friend as an emotional support, she'll come out and have
I see the point of contention. My reading of the movie is that there is nothing Virginia could have done to save Catherine from her spiral. If Virginia was totally attentive to her emotional needs, totally supportive, said everything right, did everything right, Catherine would have still ended up insane.
I don't think so.
She was doomed from the beginning.
Well, this goes then to your opinion on what burden does a friend take on to be the bastion of their friend's emotional well-being.
Well, and Virginia's not a great friend in that respect because she is passive aggressive. She is kind of spiteful, and she's very somewhat distant.
Removing that from the film, what do you believe generally out in the world is what level of responsibility does a friend have to say, you're going through a bad time, let me carry you on your back?
It's not a matter of responsibility. It's a matter of inclination. If you found a truly good friend who genuinely cares for your well-being, then they will make the choice to be supportive in the way that they can and try to help you. But the fact is a lot of friendships are just as mercenary as sexual relationships, because we could speculate on the origins of the friendship between Virginia and Catherine, but there's clearly always an element of looking up to or adulation that can easily turn into envy in a friendship. So in Virginia's case, she probably was drawn to Catherine because Catherine seemed, as she says, to have everything figured out. She seemed to not be plagued by, the normal emotional difficulties of navigating aging and relationships. And Virginia was probably attracted to Catherine on that basis initially, but that also is the root of envy, because I don't have the things that this person has. I like this person because they have those things, but I also envy this person. So friendships are just as difficult as sexual relationships in that respect. And if you're looking for somebody to be totally empathetic, that's possible, but even complete empathy is not going to save a person from themselves. We're told that it's very obvious that Catherine was always a dependent person. There's nothing Virginia could have done about the suicide of her father. There's nothing Virginia could have done about James abandoning her.
She could have cared.
She could have offered empathy. Yes, she could have been more emotionally supportive, but that doesn't mean it would have worked.
Well, yeah, we don't know because she doesn't go that route, but she could have at least tried. I mean, obviously Catherine feels as though Virginia does not care about the tragedy and things that she's going through. I mean, she makes that clear from lines that she says overtly that indicate that she doesn't feel that Virginia cares. From the picture that she painted at the end, that's like this ominous portrait of Virginia, like a red background. I mean, it's very clear that that Catherine does not feel supported by Virginia in any way. And, Virginia, I think, either one, doesn't know how to be the emotional support that Catherine needs. She doesn't know how to play that role that would fix Catherine's issues. And so she just doesn't even try. It's just
it's not even that she doesn't try. She does things that exacerbate it intentionally.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where like, if you ever had a friend with depression, you're like, this is an emotional drag on me to constantly be around you when you're talking about death and how you're depressed and how, your life is terrible and all of these things. It is. And you're talking about a week that is supposed to be a fun getaway.
Okay, but you act like she's just emotionally cold and indifferent when she's doing things that exacerbate it by intention, which she clearly is.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I think there. This is how.
I remember that dialogue. You remember that dialogue when Catherine's painting Virginia's picture, and Virginia says, it's like I'm seeing you for the first time. And then she says, oh, because you used to have everything figured out, and now you've hit rock bottom, and I'm seeing you for the first time.
Yeah,
that's a malicious thing to say.
Okay, but
she's saying it to answer the question
of where her malice ends and care actually begins, because she's shown at the end there to be extremely saddened by the image of Catherine crumpled up on the floor next to the salad that she brought. Like, Virginia shows emotion witnessing
to a degree, yeah.
Just how far. So where does the malice end? And
well, it's murky. It's obviously an ambivalent situation where she sort of has some satisfaction at Catherine's decline because it vindicates her own choices in life, but she also has an emotional regard for Catherine that makes her sometimes stick up and feel very badly about Catherine's decline. So it's an ambivalent thing. But the broader point is that Catherine, there was probably nothing. You're putting the onus of the consequence on Virginia, for the consequence for Catherine on Virginia, when I think Catherine was predisposed to self-combust like that from the beginning of the movie. It doesn't matter what Virginia would have done.
No, I think if it wanted to effectively do or portray the philosophy that you're saying, it would have shown Virginia like in a relationship or hooking up with James.
Yeah, that would be the classic thing for envious friend to do. Yeah,
but it doesn't show something, or it would have been revealed that James had cheated on Catherine with Virginia. It doesn't show that. And so that's why I think the relationships aspect are not the primary source of decline for Catherine. The primary source of decline is the disinterest her friend has in accommodating her needs.
Yeah, that's where we don't see the movie the same way. Catherine is constantly talking about her father and James. These are the sources of her mental decline. Virginia, she's looking for help from Virginia, but that doesn't mean that anything Virginia could have done would be able to erase those things. Catherine's a dependent person. She found greater degrees of love and sort of nurturing from her ex-boyfriend and her father, and they are both gone. And so the idea that Virginia sort of manufactures the madness of Catherine, and she's the whole reason it happens. I don't accept that version of that interpretation of the movie, because Catherine is already in a bad state at the very beginning before we even see Virginia, and her decline and her preoccupation is constantly with her father who killed himself and her boyfriend who dumped her. So that's where her mind is at the whole stay in Virginia's cabin or house. And so the movie doesn't clarify that exactly. It doesn't say, well, maybe if Virginia had been a supportive friend, Catherine could have been okay. But to me, Catherine's going to be in a bad state no matter what Virginia does. And so that to put the onus on her as if Virginia created Catherine's madness or caused it to happen is just not true.
Well, I think I mean, again, I think the key is to identifying where the malice stops with Virginia in the decisions that she's making. So, the party that Virginia throws, but where she brings all those people there, is that a malicious action taken against Catherine to cause her to have a meltdown?
It's something
she
knows Catherine will respond negatively to, and she doesn't really care.
But, okay, right, and so it's about the fact that Catherine continually seeks an emotional support from Virginia that Virginia does not offer. And so it's not about the men, it's not about the relationships. She's not envious of the relationships in this party that Virginia is having, right? I mean, it's not like she's out there.
You keep using the term envy. Catherine is never envious of Virginia. Virginia is envious of Catherine. Catherine's never envious of Virginia. Catherine has expectations from Virginia that are not being met. But I'm trying to say that even if those expectations were met, that would not necessarily help Catherine from her spiral.
Yeah, well, I don't think it would accelerate it, and I don't think ultimately it would reach the point that it does, where arguably she commits suicide. It's not clear, left to your interpretation, I suppose, but it reaches a really low point regardless. It's complete insanity or suicide or whatever. That doesn't happen if Virginia basically doesn't bring the guy around, doesn't hold the parties, just is there to be like, all right, this is going to be a vacation or getaway about us and being there for each other.
You can't say that definitively. We don't know what, like I keep saying, we don't know how Catherine would have been able to maybe she would have been able to overcome these difficulties, maybe not. To me, Catherine's state has more to do with her own personality of being dependent largely on men. Virginia is not going to be able to give the kind of nurturing oversight of her that she has had from her father and that she had from James. Even if she's...
I don't know what your basis for that is. She's seeking an emotional support from her friends. She presumably believes that she can be that.
You notice Catherine, that scene at the table where Catherine, lambasts Rich.
Yeah.
And there's a moment in that diatribe where she, indicates Virginia and says, she says to Rich, you are why decency doesn't exist, and you are what impedes relationships between decent people or something. And she indicates Virginia. Remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Right. Why is Catherine directing her diatribe at the man?
Because everything is a passive-aggressive hit against her friend.
No, in the context of that, in the context of what Catherine says, she is actually implying that Virginia is one of the good ones and that Rich is the problem, that he's involved in her life. He's not good enough for her.
But Rich is a choice that Virginia is making.
I understand that. So you might expect Catherine to lash out at Virginia.
No, because that is not how either character is presented. They don't lash out at one another. All of their anger and passive aggressive nature is directed at somebody else.
It's under the surface. That's certainly true. But that's not a passive aggressive comment when Catherine suggests that Virginia is one of the decent people. That's not being passive aggressive. She's saying, you Rich are the problem because you have come in between us decent people, me and Virginia, from being able to have a good life or fix the problems in our lives because you are not decent, you Rich. So Catherine has this idea that Virginia would be good, would be a very good friend, a very emotionally supportive friend, if men did not exist or men were not involved in their lives. That's kind of the idea she has. And she does not, and now what is that? That's basically saying I'm absolving Virginia to some degree of the responsibility of her actions because I'm saying that she is under the malicious influence of others who I will blame directly and hold responsible. So from the whole movie shows, and it's the same with her father, where Catherine almost blames her father for killing himself, reflected on her. It's like, you did this to me. It's not so much an understanding of what the father may or may not have been going through. It's you abandoned me by killing yourself. There's not a sympathy of, well, he might have just been depressed to the extent I am. And so Catherine is very much of the old guard in holding men more responsible for actions than she holds Virginia or herself. And so Catherine is very much male-centered in terms of assessing who is responsible for what and who is causing the problems in the world. Isn't she?
Yeah, but the men sort of exist by the decision making, with the exception of her father. Relationships are a choice, and so it's one of those things where Catherine, I think, would feel guilty about lashing out at Virginia because Virginia is the one she sought out to be the emotional support. So she doesn't want to isolate herself even further by going after the one person she is believing can be that emotional support. So she takes it out on Rich, but implicates Virginia in what she's saying about Rich. You coming here is causing my depression. Well, who's bringing you here?
Right? But she can't openly blame Virginia.
I know, that's what I just said.
Okay.
So she's not blaming.
So is this not a reflection of her priorities, which is that when women take action, it's because they are being compelled by the negative behavior of men. When men take action, it's because they are being indecent and irresponsible. She has a very old-fashioned notion of responsibility. When men take action, it's far more intentional and responsible than when women do, because women are being, influenced by malicious men. That's her view of the world. And we can say that's an old-fashioned view, and it goes to the point of Virginia has made the adjustments to the world in which everyone's got a certain level of autonomy in sexual matters and in life matters. And Virginia says, people, for her, Rich is no better or worse than he should be. He's not a particularly pleasant guy by normal standards, but he'll do for her because she's accepted the limits of what you can actually expect from another person. And she herself doesn't go the extra mile in her relationships for the same reason, which is he is what he is, she is what she is, I'm going to be what I'm going to be, and we're just going to have to make the best of what is there. Whereas Catherine has this expectation of good behavior from men, and the expectation for women is not insisted on by her that strongly, because she has this idea that women react to the bad behavior of men. And so, in a way, she is kind of an old guard type woman, and that's shown in her willingness to submit to her father emotionally and submit to James emotionally. And she has paid the price in a world in which men do not feel like they have a responsibility to conduct themselves decently with women.
Yeah, but I mean, again, all of that is an indictment or an indirect indictment of women. Because if you're going to say that people in today's age have entire autonomy over sexual matters, then the power always in a sexual situation pretty much is on the woman. It's the man seeking to do something with them and them saying yes or no. It's rarely, I mean, unless they're super rich, which rich in this is not perceived to be some like millionaire or something like that, some super high desirable guy in society, right? He's just perceived to be sort of an average guy. I mean, a woman's not going to go seek that out. The man is going to approach the woman and say, I want to do stuff with you. And so if she's taking this worldview that, you know, the bad behavior of men influences women, then that's actually an indirect slight against the women, because they're the ones in control of saying, yes, I want you to come sleep with me, or yes, I want to be in a relationship with you. That is not the power of the man, the decision of the man to make.
Well, okay, so, I mean, we're hitting at just basic facts of human sexuality and how these things develop. From the standpoint of a man, there are certain things you can do, and there are certain types of women you can get. Basically, a lot of men, especially nowadays, have the idea of, I want to be able to get sex or, have a woman around without a firm guarantee of commitment. And so women know this, and they know that the higher they pursue, the more likely, perhaps, the man will be tempted to do that because he can more. And so that's just the normal sexual dynamics that everyone's got to deal with nowadays. And it's not so much that you blame one sex or the other. It's that you simply say...
It's not about blaming one sex or the other. It's about saying in these situations with normal people, I mean, yes, obviously guys can say things that make them sound more appealing. They can smooth talk, whatever. At the end of the day, you go down to the local bar, you have local, just regular interactions with people. It's always the man seeking consent from the woman to engage in a friends with benefits kind of relationship or a hookup or things like that. It's rarely the woman seeking out, like they may desire a relationship with a man internally, but to actually go seek it out.
That's ugly, yeah. Women don't do that.
Right. So to indict the man and say you're the problem is an indirect indictment of Virginia and saying, well, you're actually the problem for bringing this toxic guy around because he's the one that wants to continuously hook up with you. He needs you to say, yes, come over to my place and have sex with me.
Yeah. The point is that we nowadays would like to deny certain basic facts that seem to be persistent even in a time where we give everyone, equal autonomy and assume everybody's equally responsible for the decisions. Obviously, women do not want to be it's very ugly for a woman to be proactive in pursuing. That's an ugly thing. And they do not want to do that. Now, but women respond to the situation of the world that we have in different ways. So some just throw up their hands and say, whatever, I'll do what I got to do. Others, get behind a closed shell. Others become basically ascetic because they're like, I don't like what's out there. And others will maybe find a good relationship in which the man is stable and it works out. So these are all individual choices that people have to make. And insofar as women would like to feel less responsible for their mistakes, maybe that's true. But the movie shows that Rich and Virginia kind of are fine for each other.
I know
Virginia doesn't open up to him, and he doesn't open up to her, and they're both.
That's why an attack on Rich is really, again, a passive aggressive attack.
Because she has the old idea that men's bad behavior is. I mean, men are responsible for their bad behavior. She assumed men need to behave in a decent way, otherwise, because as a moral obligation, so to speak. Now, from a man's perspective, women don't necessarily always behave that way because they have their own priorities. So a lot of men take the cynical attitude of, I'm just going to take what I can get and use the things I can use to get it, and I'm not going to offer any commitment. And so Catherine's frustration is the frustration that a lot of people have with the current world we're in, where everybody is holding back because the status and the social considerations of relationships are known to everybody. And Catherine doesn't like it, but that's the world she's in. Virginia accepts that that's the world she's in, and so puts up her walls.
I know. Yeah, we've been over that. What I'm saying isn't an indictment. Fine, you can claim, criticize or take a negative view of men who engage in what you perceive as toxic behavior. But even in today's society, is it not still a passive-aggressive indictment if you understand the sexual dynamics of relationships? Is it not still an indictment on the person who's in the position to say, yes, I want this, or no, I don't? By this point, everybody understands the perspective of men. They like having sex. They want to have sex, right? What's less understood or what's more variable in men is who they would accept as a long-term partner.
What you're ignoring is the genuine emotional bond that you have to suppress. Because naturally, any sexual encounter, for women maybe more, but for men also, is going to produce some emotional bond. And so you have to actually fight that to be able to have the distance perspective that Virginia has. You have to, suppress it. You do. Because you're fighting against, you're fighting, men and women need each other emotionally, but they also know that each of them can, when they give themselves emotionally, each of them can screw each other over. So it's a constant battle.
That choice to suppress it is a choice to sort of submit to the toxic behavior of the man. Which, if that's what you're doing, then you are complicit.
Right, which some women say, I don't have a choice. Because it becomes a matter of quality, which is a man behaves, from a woman's perspective, more indecently or, more, to the degree that he can. And men say, well, I can do what I want.
I think somebody like Virginia, I mean, if she was perceived to be sort of just this dumb, oblivious person, it might make more. I mean, presumably she's someone who would understand her value as an attractive woman and a desirable woman, even if just on physical appearance grounds, right?
Yeah, I mean, beauty is cheap.
Right. So for her to make the decision to say, well, I understand my value. I understand that I could go get a man tomorrow. I'm probably a pretty decent man.
What do you mean get a man? Get
in a relationship.
Okay, a relationship. Oh, how long?
However long she wants.
A lifetime?
Sure, if she wanted to.
Yeah, you have to clarify what you mean by getting a man, because yeah, a man getting there to show up
in a relationship, a meaningful relationship.
Is she in a relationship with a Rich?
Well, she's in sort of a loose,
Yeah.
whatever. But what I'm saying is, if we accept that Catherine believes in this deeper idea of love and committed relationships as being the ultimate virtue in relationships between men and women, that you're supposed to be dedicated, you're supposed to be there for one another, you're supposed to behave well,
That's the ideal.
then Rich's behavior and Rich's influence is only allowed if Virginia, her friend, says it is okay.
Yeah, and
Rich would not be there if not for
this is just the norm. Different women and men have different reactions to the situation that we have. Virginia has decided, I'm not going to open myself up. I still would like to have sexual companionship with a man because you got to have it. So I am just going to take this guy who, would I marry him? No. Would I want him for a long-term relationship? Maybe not. But for what I've set myself up for, the parameters I've imposed on myself emotionally, he is perfect. He is perfect.
And you're suggesting that makes the man solely responsible for...
No, I'm saying Catherine views it that way. You can have any view you want. You can blame whoever you want.
She's just not a self-aware person.
Well,
because
that's obvious. She's lived in a sort of she's had a sheltered life up until the beginning of the movie. Basically, the movie makes that quite clear. So she has a sheltered life where it seems that the men in her life felt themselves obligated to be her emotional support. It's like she's not open to the world of the fact that men will fake emotional support for the purposes of sexual access or something. So that's kind of a new thing for her. Maybe it's not entirely new, but basically she was for a long time able to skirt those problems that Virginia wasn't. And now she's seeing in the full light how men behave. It's the idea of blaming or basically saying, well, we'll assign responsibility to one or the other. It's just a matter of personal choice.
But then that would seem to suggest then that she would be adopting Virginia's viewpoint, not going insane.
Well, no, because the matter of her personality matters. If you happen to be a dependent personality, you can't be like Virginia. It's impossible. Because you can't actually put the wall on your emotion. Well, okay, maybe you can.
Maybe an intentional choice that somebody
it's
makes.
Intentional within the bounds of what you as a personality can afford to do. Virginia is a cold person by nature, which means she can take on the casual posture far easier than Catherine, who is a emotionally volatile and dependent person by nature. So Catherine's going to get burned in this world if she confronts a indecent man as she did, whereas Virginia's not. Now, Virginia's going to not have the kind of loving relationship that Catherine had for a while, but basically from each of their perspectives, they've probably made the right decision. In fact, Catherine would go back to James if he called her. That seems to be a fair implication from the movie.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. So you say, well, you've seen the world, now adjust. It's not that easy. People have their personalities and what they can afford to do on account of those personalities.
Okay, but then what I think would be sort of the proper response to that would be for her to go to Virginia and say, how do you do it? How are you cool with this world and with these kinds of relationships? Like what?
Because she can't do that because she doesn't want to accept that that's the world she's in. That's obvious, but her whole diatribe against Rich is based off of.
Isn't that accepting it?
That's not accepting it at all. That's indignation. That's them.
I'll
turn you be like this,
right? But then that's her accepting that some people are like this, because she sort of uses him as a symbol for many people, right? Basically defines him as devoid of good, devoid of virtue, which she's implicating a lot of other people in, a lot of other men in. And so presumably she's accepting to some degree that a large portion of men or people out there engage in this. So she has that recognition. It's not, I think she can't believe it's happening to her because of her sort of a privilege lifestyle that she lived, being born into wealth and having a committed relationship, things like that. It's her being faced with something that she knows exists in the world but doesn't want to.
Okay.
But if you have that level of self-awareness to say, I know these people exist, then you would have the level of self-awareness to say, they're only allowed to exist because of people like my friend. In which case we go back to it. An attack on Rich is an indirect attack on Virginia.
That is your rational perspective. That is, I mean, you have a distance view of the situation. You're taking a very rational perspective on it, which I've pointed out also. That is not the perspective of the character. Catherine is not that kind of person. And a lot of people aren't that kind of person. And it's very difficult to, if you have sort of the fact that if you have the idea that women are meant to be nurtured, women are meant to sort of be taken care of, which most women do not have anymore, but which Catherine clearly does, then you are not inclined to blame women for bad consequences that happen by men's behavior. You're inclined to blame the man. She blames her own father for committing suicide. So everything in her mind is, men are doing these things when they should be taking care of me. And if you want to say, the movie doesn't really clarify whether that perspective is what we should have, or whether you got to move on and just kind of become like Virginia and cynical about it. But those are the choices you have in the world. And if sometimes you get burned and sometimes you can mercifully avoid it. But in Catherine's case, she got burned and she doesn't have the personality to be able to adjust to that reality.
Well, maybe we could find some middle ground that people need Jesus. So that's our conversation on Queen of Earth. Very good, interesting, complex drama. A lot to dissect, and it is a independent movie, so you're supporting indie film by watching it, which there's a lot of good stuff in that realm that you won't see in the mainstream. So check it out, and next week we'll be talking about Inglourious Basterds, so we'll see you next episode of Dueling Banjos.